Today, we are diving deep into some really crucial glands, the thyroid and the parathyroid. Tiny things,
Mhm.
right. But wow, when they go wrong, they can affect everything. Energy, heart rate, the whole works. Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission. A rapid deep dive into Chapter 58 of Medical Surgical Nursing. We're going to focus hard on cellular regulation, nutrition, and gas exchange. See how they tie into these endocrine issues.
Yeah, and setting the stage is so important. You really need a solid grasp of pathophysiology, the assessment cues, what to look for, and critically, the priority nursing management. Because these conditions, they can range from, mild and easy to miss,
Right.
all the way to life-threatening crises like myxedema coma or thyroid storm. And what's really key, the sort of thread running through this whole chapter, is cellular regulation. It's
It's
fundamental.
cellular regulation, got it. So basically, how the cells manage their energy and function.
Exactly. Think of thyroid hormones as the body's metabolic thermostat or gas pedal. Too little hormone, everything slows down. Too much, everything speeds up dangerously.
Okay, let's start with that slowdown. Hypothyroidism. So pathologically, it's just not enough thyroid hormone, TH, being secreted.
Right, or sometimes none at all. And the result is this whole body decrease in metabolism. It often creeps up so slowly, people just dismiss the symptoms for ages.
Makes sense. They just feel tired.
Yeah, tired, maybe putting on weight, feeling cold, it gets missed. We should probably define a couple of terms quickly. Euthyroid just means normal thyroid function.
Okay.
And hypothyroidism is the low function state we're talking about. You might also see a goiter, which is just a visibly enlarged thyroid gland. But importantly, a goiter itself doesn't tell you if it's hypo or hyper. It just means the gland is enlarged.
Right. It could be trying harder, or it could be overactive, or something else.
Precisely. Now, the most common cause, at least here in the US, is Hashimoto thyroiditis. That's an autoimmune condition.
Ah, so the body's attacking itself again.
Exactly. It attacks and destroys the thyroid tissue over time. And it's way more common in women, like 7 to 10 times more, usually hitting between 30 and 60.
Okay, so when we're assessing someone, what are the big clues in their history? You mentioned fatigue.
Huge fatigue. They might report sleeping way more, like 14, maybe even 16 hours a day. Generalized weakness. Constipation is common because the gut slows down too. And this really profound cold intolerance.
Always freezing.
Yeah. A good question to ask is, how does your energy level or activity now compare to a year ago? That helps capture that slow, gradual decline.
That makes sense. And then there's this specific type of edema you see in severe cases, right? Myxedema.
Yes. And this is fascinating. It's not your typical pitting edema from fluid overload. It's mucinous. It's caused by a buildup of these protein and sugar compounds, glycosaminoglycans, or GAGs.
Gags, okay.
Yeah, GAGs. The slowed metabolism can't clear them out, so they accumulate in the tissues, drawing water in but making it feel doughy, not pitting.
Yeah.
This causes that classic look. Puffiness around the eyes, a thick tongue, and even a husky voice because the larynx gets edematous too.
Wow, okay, so the gags are literally gumming up the works.
That's a good way to put it. And the slowdown hits everywhere. Cardiovascularly, you see bradycardia, low heart rate, hypotension, low blood pressure, sometimes even an enlarged heart over time.
And metabolically.
Well, the basal metabolic rate tanks. Their body temperature is often consistently low, like under 97 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 36.1 Celsius. And they tend to gain weight even if they aren't eating much because they just aren't burning calories.
And mentally. I imagine that slows down too.
Oh, definitely. Slowed thinking, impaired memory, confusion, lethargy. You might notice decreased tendon reflexes, and patients often report paresthesias, that numbness or tingling.
Okay, so lots of clues. How do we confirm it with labs?
For primary hypothyroidism, the thyroid gland itself is failing, so you'll see low serum T3 and T4 levels. Those are the actual thyroid hormones, but
The TSH will be high.
exactly. TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, comes from the pituitary gland. It's trying to tell the thyroid to work harder. So if the thyroid isn't responding, the pituitary keeps pumping out more TSH. So low T3, T4, high TSH, that's classic primary hypothyroidism.
Got it. Now, a really important point for older adults. The book mentions thyroid hormone secretion decreases with age anyway, and they're super sensitive to replacement therapy.
Extremely sensitive. You have to be really cautious starting thyroid hormone replacement, like levothyroxine, in older adults, especially if they have any underlying heart disease.
Why is that?
Because suddenly, cranking up their metabolism can put a huge strain on their cardiovascular system. You risk triggering severe hypertension, heart failure, even an MI. So the rule is start low and go slow. very slow dose increases.
Okay, that's a critical safety point. Let's talk management. What are the top priorities for nursing care?
Well, based on everything we've discussed, the top three are probably managing decreased gas exchange, dealing with hypotension and reduced perfusion, and the big one, preventing or managing myxedema coma.
Gas exchange seems key, especially if they're weak and lethargic.
Absolutely. Monitor their respiratory rate and depth, keep an eye on pulse oximetry, and here's another huge safety point. Sedatives are dangerous in these patients.
Because they'll slow down breathing even more.
Precisely. It worsens gas exchange. If sedation is absolutely necessary, the dose has to be significantly reduced. It's a major risk.
Okay, so the core treatment is replacing the hormone they're missing.
Yep. Lifelong thyroid hormone replacement. Usually the drug of choice is levothyroxine, but again, remember that safety alert. Start low, go slow, especially with cardiac patients. Prevent that hypertension or MI risk.
Right. And what about myxedema coma? You said that's the life-threatening extreme.
It is. It's the end stage of untreated severe hypothyroidism. You see a drastically reduced level of consciousness, often stupor or coma. Respiratory failure is the most common cause of death.
Respiratory failure.
Yeah. Plus severe hypotension, profound hypothermia, like really low body temp hyponatremia, so low sodium and hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. It's a total system collapse.
So emergency situation, what do we do?
It's all hands on deck. The best practice box highlights key actions. Number one, maintain a patent airway. That might mean intubation and ventilation. Then, IV fluids, IV levothyroxine you need to get hormoning fast. 5e glucose for the hypoglycemia, often IV corticosteroids too.
And warming them up?
Yes, but carefully. Use warm blankets, monitor their temperature very closely, and frequent monitoring of blood pressure is vital.
Okay. Once they're stable, or for ongoing management, what about patient education?
It's crucial because it's lifelong therapy. They have to understand they need this medication forever, and how to take it properly is key. Levothyroxine needs to be taken on an empty stomach.
Empty stomach. Why?
Absorption. Food interferes with it. Ideally, take it first thing in the morning, at least 30 to 60 minutes before breakfast. And importantly, keep it separate from fiber supplements, calcium, iron. Those things bind it up. Usually advise like 4 hours apart.
4 hours. Okay. And how can they tell if the dose is right?
We teach them two simple things to monitor themselves: their need for sleep and their bowel elimination frequency. If they start needing way more sleep again or getting constipated, their dose might be too low. If they're jittery, can't sleep, having diarrhea, it might be too high.
Simple but effective indicators. Okay, let's flip the switch. What about the opposite problem, hyperthyroidism?
Right, thyrotoxicosis. This is excessive thyroid hormone secretion. Instead of a slowdown, you get hypermetabolism. Everything is ramped up, including sympathetic nervous system activity.
Like the body's engine is redlining.
Exactly. The thyroid hormone boosts heart rate and stroke volume, so cardiac output goes up. Blood pressure might increase, often with a widened pulse pressure. Metabolism is so fast, the body starts breaking down protein faster than it can build it. That's a negative nitrogen balance.
So muscle wear gain.
Can be, yeah. And fat stores get burned up quickly, leading to weight loss, even though the person often has an increased appetite. They're eating more, but losing weight.
That must be alarming for patients.
Ugh.
What causes this overdrive?
The most common cause is another autoimmune disorder, Graves' disease, also known as toxic diffuse goiter. In Graves', the body makes these autoantibodies called thyroid-stimulating immunoglobulins, or TSIs.
TSIs.
Yep. And these TSIs basically mimic TSH. They bind to the TSH receptors on the thyroid gland and tell it to just keep pumping out hormone constantly. It overrides the normal feedback loop.
Wow. So the pituitary is probably trying to shut it down, sending low TSH, but the TSIs keep the accelerator floored.
You got it. And Graves has some unique signs we don't usually see in other types of hyperthyroidism, like toxic multinodular goiter or TMNG.
What are those unique signs?
Two main ones. First, exophthalmos. That's the abnormal bulging or protrusion of the eyes. It's caused by edema and fat deposits building up behind the eyes, pushing them forward. Sometimes the eyelids can't even close properly.
Oh, wow. That sounds uncomfortable and potentially damaging to the eye.
It definitely can be. The other is pretibial myxedema. Despite the name myxedema, it's different from the hypothyroidism type. This is a waxy swelling, usually on the shins and feet. It doesn't pit. TMNG, the multinodular goiter type, is usually milder and doesn't cause the eye or skin changes.
Okay. So for assessment, instead of cold intolerance, we're looking for
Heat intolerance, that's often the first and most bothersome symptom. They feel hot all the time, sweat easily. Also palpitations, maybe atrial fibrillation, shortness of breath even with mild exertion, fatigue, but also insomnia. They're wired but tired. Unplanned weight loss despite eating well, and sometimes an increased libido initially.
Quite the contrast. What about physical findings?
You might see fine, soft, silky hair. Their skin is often smooth, warm, and moist. Deep tendon reflexes are usually hyperactive, very brusque, and of course you might see or feel a goiter. But big safety point here.
Oh, what is it?
Crucial nursing safety priority. If you suspect hyperthyroidism, do not palpate the goiter.
Don't touch the enlarged thyroid.
No.
Why not?
Because manipulating an overactive thyroid gland can actually squeeze out a large amount of stored hormone all at once. It can trigger a sudden worsening of symptoms, potentially pushing them into thyroid storm.
Wow. Okay, so hands off the goiter and suspected hypothyroidism. Got it. How about diagnostics? Labs would be the opposite of hypo, I assume.
Generally, yes. You'll typically see low or undetectable TSH because the pituitary is trying to shut down production, and high T3 and T4 levels.
Makes sense. Any other tests?
A radioactive iodine uptake scan, or RAIU, is common. In hyperthyroidism, especially Graves', the thyroid is hungry for iodine, so the uptake will be increased. An ECG is also important, looking for tachycardia, atrial fibrillation, or other rhythm changes.
Okay, so how do we manage this non-surgically? What are the priorities?
It's about calming things down. Monitor vital signs frequently, at least every 4 hours. Reduce stimulation, provide a quiet environment, limit visitors, maybe dim the lights, and promote comfort, especially managing that heat intolerance. Cooling measures, cool showers, lightweight clothing.
And medications?
Drug therapy is a mainstay. The main class is thionomates. The preferred drug now is usually methimazole. It works by blocking the production of thyroid hormones.
Methimazole. Any big risks?
Yes, a significant one. Methimazole can cause birth defects, so it's generally avoided in the first trimester of pregnancy. Propylthiouracil, or PTU, might be used then, but it has a risk of liver toxicity, so methimazole is preferred otherwise. Another class is iodine preparations.
Iodine. Doesn't the thyroid use iodine to make hormones?
It does, but high doses of iodine actually have a short-term suppressive effect. They inhibit hormone synthesis and release. But, and this is important, they should only be given after starting a thionamide like methimazole.
Why after?
Because if you give iodine first, it can actually cause an initial increase in thyroid hormone release before the suppression kicks in. So thionamide first to block production, then iodine later if needed for rapid control, often before surgery. Beta blockers like propranolol are also used symptomatically to control the tachycardia, palpitations, and anxiety.
Okay, that makes sense. What about radioactive iodine therapy? RAI.
Right. RAI therapy uses a radioactive isotope, iodine-131, or 131I. The thyroid cells take up this radioactive iodine just like regular iodine, but the radiation then destroys those cells. It effectively ablates or shuts down the overactive thyroid tissue.
Is that done in the hospital?
Usually outpatient. The dose is calculated carefully, but because it's an unsealed radioactive source, the patient needs specific safety precautions for about a week afterwards to protect others.
Like what?
Things like using a separate toilet if possible and flushing it 2-3 times after use, washing their laundry separately, avoiding close, prolonged contact with pregnant women and young children. Basic radiation safety principles.
Got it. And surgery. Thyroidectomy.
That's an option if drug therapy fails, if there's a very large goiter causing compression, or sometimes by patient preference. The goal before surgery is to get the patient as close to a euthyroid or normal state as possible using antithyroid drugs.
To make the surgery safer.
Exactly. Reduces the risk of thyroid storm during or after the operation. Post-op, we teach them to support their neck, placing both hands behind their neck when they cough or move to avoid straining the suture line.
Okay, post-op thyroidectomy sounds like a high-risk period. What are we watching for?
Absolutely. There are 4 major potential complications we monitor very closely.
4. Okay, what are they?
First, hemorrhage. The neck is very vascular. Bleeding can happen internally, potentially compressing the airway. It's most likely in the first 24 hours. Look for swelling, drainage, frequent swallowing.
Airway compression. That leads to the second one.
It can. The second is respiratory distress or reduced gas exchange. This could be from hemorrhage, but also from laryngeal edema or swelling from the surgery itself. A key sign is stridor, that high-pitched, harsh sound on inspiration. That's an emergency.
Stridor means airway obstruction.
Yes. You need emergency tracheostomy equipment at the bedside. Always. Third complication, hypercalcemia and tetany.
Why hypocalcemia?
Because the tiny parathyroid glands, which control calcium levels, sit right behind the thyroid, they can easily be accidentally damaged or removed during thyroidectomy. If PTH levels drop, calcium levels drop.
And low calcium causes.
Increased neuromuscular excitability, tingling around the mouth, fingers, toes, muscle cramps,
Mm.
and potentially tetany severe muscle spasms. We assess for Schrosteck's sign, facial twitching when tapping the facial nerve, and Trousseau sign, carpal spasm with blood pressure, cuff inflation. You need high-V calcium gluconate readily available.
Okay, hemorrhage, respiratory distress, hypocalcemia. What's the fourth?
Laryngeal nerve damage. These nerves run close to the thyroid, too. Damage can cause hoarseness or a weak, breathy voice. It might be temporary or permanent. Assess voice quality regularly.
Wow, a lot to watch for post-op. Now, the hyperthyroid crisis. Thyroid storm.
Thyroid crisis, yes. It's the hyperthyroid equivalent of mixed edema coma, a life-threatening surge of thyroid hormone. It's often triggered by stress, infection, or surgery in someone with uncontrolled hyperthyroidism.
What are the signs? How do we know it's happening?
Key indicators are a sudden, dramatic increase in metabolic rate. Fever is huge. You must report even a 1 degree Fahrenheit rise immediately. Severe hypertension, extreme tachycardia, often over 130 BPM. Also, GI upset, like vomiting or diarrhea, agitation, anxiety, tremors, maybe even delirium or psychosis.
Sounds terrifying. What's the emergency management?
Again, all hands on deck. Maintain airway and ventilation. Give antithyroid drugs like methimazole or PTU, often followed by iodine preparations. Beta blockers are crucial to control the heart rate and blood pressure. Aggressive cooling measures cooling blankets, ice packs, 4V fluids, continuous cardiac monitoring. Treat the underlying cause if possible.
Intense. What about the eye problems in Graves' disease, the exophthalmos?
Management is often symptomatic. Artificial tears for dryness, maybe taking the eyes shut at night if they don't close. Elevating the head of the bed can reduce periorbital edema. For severe cases, high-dose corticosteroids might be used, or even surgical decompression of the orbit.
Okay. Let's quickly touch on the other related disorders mentioned. Thyroiditis.
Right. Thyroiditis is just inflammation of the thyroid. Can be acute, often bacterial, needs antibiotics. Or chronic, like Hashimoto's, which we already discussed, autoimmune, usually leads to hypothyroidism eventually.
And thyroid cancer.
Usually presents as a single painless lump or nodule in the neck. Several types exist. Papillary is the most common and tends to be slow-growing. Follicular is less common, but more likely to spread, often to bone or lungs. Treatment typically involves surgery, often a total thyroidectomy.
Which means they'll then need lifelong management for.
Induced hypothyroidism. Exactly. They'll be on levothyroxine for life.
Okay, last piece. The parathyroids. Different glands, different job.
Totally different. 4 tiny glands, usually on the back of the thyroid. Their sole job is regulating calcium and phosphate balance through parathyroid hormone, or PTH.
So hypoparathyroidism.
Means not enough PTH. This leads directly to hypocalcemia, low calcium, and also high phosphate. The big danger here is that hypocalcemia, we talked about tingling, numbness, muscle cramps, tetany, positive Schrosteck's and Trousseau signs. Management is lifelong calcium and vitamin D replacement. Vitamin D is needed to absorb calcium.
And hyperparathyroidism.
Too much PTH. This pulls calcium out of the bones and into the blood, causing hypercalcemia and low phosphate. This weakens bones, increasing the risk of fractures. High calcium in the blood also increases the risk of kidney stones.
What's the treatment?
If it's caused by a tumor on one of the glands, surgery to remove it is common. If surgery isn't an option, drugs like cinacalcet can be used to trick the parathyroid glands into releasing less PTH. Managing the hypercalcemia itself is also important. Hydration, diuretics sometimes.
Okay, wow. That covers a lot of ground. Connecting this back to the big picture.
Yeah, I think understanding these thyroid and parathyroid issues really forces you to integrate knowledge across body systems. It all comes back to that idea of cellular regulation. But you see the impact on the heart, the lungs, the brain, the gut, the bones, everything. And recognizing those subtle early signs before they spiral into a crisis like mixed edema coma or thyroid storm is just critical.
Absolutely. So final takeaways. Hypo is the slowdown. Think fatigue, cold, constipation, needs replacement hormone. Hyper is the speed up. Think heat, weight loss, palpitations, need suppression or ablation. And for both, lifelong monitoring and patient education are absolutely paramount. So we've learned today that really subtle, subjective things the patient tells you, like, I just need more sleep lately, or changes in their bowel habits, these are just as vital as the lab numbers for managing these conditions day to day. How does relying so much on the patient's own self-awareness shift the nurse's role? Does it make us more of a partner in their care rather than just, the person giving the meds? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.